Good afternoon. We'd like to call the Griffin-Spalding County Board of Education work session to order. We ask that you place all your electronic devices on silent or either turn them off, whichever your pleasure. At this time, I'm going to ask my seatmate, Mr. Doss, to lead us in a word of prayer.
Let us pray. Father, Lord, we just thank you for this day. We thank you for the rain that we have received. We thank you for the sunshine that is coming. Lord, we thank you for Griffin-Spalding County Schools. We ask, Father, Lord, that you continue to put a hedge of protection around, Lord, every student, every teacher, every family, Father, Lord. We pray for continued healing for those that may be sick. Lord, we thank you for this day and the presentations that are being brought before us for the work of this county. And I thank you that you will lead us and guide us in all we do. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
I would like to just ask for, before we do the pledge, just ask for a moment of silence for we have and students who are out and dealing with various medical issues. And I would just like for a moment of silence for those individuals. Amen. Let us pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. Amen. Thank you. You may be seated. Let the record show that Miss Barbara Jo Cook is not in attendance due to a work obligation, and we'd just like to get that on record. I'd like to get an adoption, a motion to adopt the agenda as presented. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Got a motion by Mr. Doss. Can I get a second? Second by Ms. McDonald. All in favor? Raise your right hand. 4-0. Thank you. Announcements. Is any, you going to do them, Mr.
I can do it for you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the board, Mr. Chair, Mr. Superintendent, and audience, following announcements are Tuesday, September 7th, 2021 will be our general Board of Education meeting here in the Learning Center. And on Tuesday, September 14th, 2021 will be the Griffin-Spalding County Schools Board of Education retreat. That concludes the report, Mr. Chair.
I would like to add into that just to give some clarity on how our meetings are operated. And for those that do not know, we have two meetings. One is a regular meeting the first Tuesday of the month, and as we do the second one, it is a work session. And I just like to make it clear that as you can see by the agenda, we do not include public comments at our work session. So to make sure everybody knows, for those who are viewing online, we do our public comment on the first Tuesday of each month, barring any meetings that are canceled due to holidays or school breaks. So I just want to make sure that's clear and everyone knows how we handle our meetings. Next, we have our consent agenda. I'd like to get a motion to accept our consent agenda. Can we get a motion, please?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Got a motion by Mr. Brown. Can I get a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Doss. All in favor? So by 4-0. Thank you. Next, we have action items, and we have board policies that will be placed on first reading. First up, Dr. Norman Sauce discussing with us policy IGB.
Good afternoon, members of the board, Mr. Chair, Mr.
Good
Superintendent,
afternoon.
members of the community. It's my pleasure to come before you today to share that the district is presenting the revision of Policy IGB, Student Support Teams, for first reading. Policy IGB, Student Support Teams, is being revised to remain current with Georgia Board of Education rules and terminology. Additionally, an emphasis is added for students' academic and behavioral supports and interventions. The next steps would be that the district will post the revision of Policy IGB on Assembly to receive input from board members and stakeholders for 30 days. The policy will be brought to the next business meeting for second reading and final board adoption. You probably also noticed, members of the board, that on the next page you should have a redlined version demonstrating the terminology that's altered or changed or revised. And then finally on the third page would be a clean version of that document for your reading. Yes, ma'am? Yes, Ms. McDonald?
Dr. Sauce, I just have one question.
Yes, ma'am?
What is the last sentence that says, and determine effectiveness and adjustments of interventions as needed as students progress are regularly monitored? What's the length of regularly monitored?
So it depends on what intervention we're talking about, whether a student would be in Tier 2 or Tier 3, but it varies generally between 8 and 12 weeks, depending on those sort of individual student factors.
Okay, and that's pretty much the norm, I guess?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you for the question. Mr. Brown, did you?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Sauce, I just want to say I'm definitely in favor of the changes for the overall policy and educational behavior needs, that we are able to then turn our focus on the whole child. Mm-hmm. The only thing that I would like for this policy to do is to list the members of the student support team at each school made available to students.
Yes, sir.
We know that a part of our mission is to make sure that our scholars are college and career ready. And I believe that advocacy is a college and career ready skill.
Certainly.
And so we know how important it is that our scholars to have relationships with our staff members, relationships to where teachers are able to advocate for them, but then scholars are able to advocate for themselves. And so I just think it will be a good thing in transparency to ensure and to make sure that we have a list of those members who are part of the SST teams at each school made readily available for parents and scholars to know who they are.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I'll definitely make note of that. Any more questions I can speak to? Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Sauce.
Yes, sir.
Next, we have Board Policy BCAE by Mr. Anthony Akins.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Board.
Good afternoon.
In the interest of time, I'm going to expedite a little bit of the information here, but the district is presenting the revision of policy BCAE, that's public hearings for first reading. Basically, policy BCAE, public hearings, has been reviewed for grammatical and syntax errors only, and no other corrections are needed at this time. So the district will post policy BCAE public hearings on Assembly for 30 days for review by the board and other stakeholders, and then brought back at the next meeting for second read.
Okay. Any questions, board members? Go ahead, Mr. Akins.
Right, so this particular policy, I just have a couple questions. What determines a public hearing outside the millage rate and the budget?
Mr. Simmons, could I?
And he's
Please.
within the policy? He's within the policy, right? Okay. Let him take it.
Could you repeat the question?
Absolutely.
I apologize.
Outside of public hearings, outside of millage rate and the budget, what else determines a public hearing?
There could be public hearings on policy. There could be public hearings for, I'm sorry,
Let me tell you why I asked that question.
okay, I'm sorry.
All right. So I asked that question because we don't operate in committees. So if I could see if we had, like, if the board actually functioned in committees, then I think, understanding, what public hearings is about and having public hearings on different policies that would tie into a different committee. But since we don't do that, does it come from the determination of the full board, or are we going to move into a committee function to where we will have public hearings? Because right now, it's just only, since I've been on the board, the public hearings have been millage rate and budget.
Yes, sir. Mr. Brown, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
At this time, I do not have plans for a recommendation to move towards committees of the whole. You're correct. The only two public hearings that we traditionally operate would be for millage rate as well as policy. If it's the board's desire to move into that direction, we can certainly talk about it and talk about what it may look like, but it just depends on what committees of the whole that the board would be interested in.
And then as we continue to look at, if you would scroll down for me, Lonnie. Well, maybe it's not on that page.
There's a second document.
There we go. There we are. I think that there are a couple things that we need to put in there. Mr. Simmons has been talking about making sure that we are able to communicate effectively. And so there are just a couple things that I think that we should add to this particular policy. One is ensuring that all members have a reasonable opportunity to express their views to the board, which is done. Completing board business effectively and efficiently in an orderly manner, and respecting the rights of board members, district staff, students, and audience members. And then also, and I'll send these bullet points to you, to ensure that proper decorum and provisions of this procedural directive are expected to be followed at all public hearings that the Board of Education has. And so essentially it says that, but I want to make sure that it's spelled out bullet by bullet within this particular policy. All right, and I'll send that to you, Sue.
That's fair.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, to go along with Mr. Brown's first question, this board can have a public hearing on anything it chooses to have a public hearing on. The only two that come to mind that are mandated by law deal with the budget and also setting the millage rate. But for instance, and we're going to address this a little bit later, the board's going to get into the reapportionment process, and I would anticipate that the board is probably going to have a public hearing related to that, just for example. So,
And just to give you a little backdrop, the board did operate in committees. I think we ended just prior to Mr. Doss coming on the board and Mr. Westbury exiting. But we did operate in committees prior to that for as long as I had been on the board. So it was something that the board decided it was kind of being a little redundant for a board member to meet with a committee and then we come back and discuss it as a board. So we just eliminated that because we were eventually going to end up discussing it as a board anyway.
I can imagine when we had 10 board members.
Right.
That
Right.
committee work was much more easier
Right.
done and not and needed.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, but we did for years operating in committees. Board member was assigned to a committee. Thank you for that. You have anything else, Mr. Akins or Mr.
Not
Brown?
on that policy, sir.
No, sir, nothing at all for this
Okay.
policy either.
You can go ahead on to the next one, Mr. Akins.
All right. The next policy the district is presenting is revision to policy AD, school attendance areas, for first reading. And upon review of this policy, it was observed that the policy was written more as a regulation and to try to get everything to be consistent. You have the red line version there of what we're looking at is possibly stricken, as well as the clean version there. And then the wording from that policy would be moved to a regulation to fall underneath policy AD, which would give us guidance of how we would go about setting school attendance areas. So the district will post this policy AD, school attendance areas, on assembly for 30 days for review by board members and stakeholders for comment. and then the policy will be brought back at the next business meeting for second reading.
On this particular one, I did not have the attachment that had the red stricken information. All I had was the action memo policy. So if we can just attach that so that I can read that over the next 30 days, that would be great for me.
Go ahead. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, board members, you have heard about the process moving forward. We probably won't have to recite to you the next steps. Just know that after each first reading, you know that process. I'll also share with you, I think it's important and appropriate to know that the goal is for there to be an administrative rule or regulation to accompany each policy. Getting back to some of the comments and the bullets that you're sending, some of our established policies included that language in the policy. The problem that creates is in the event that we need to make a pivot, whether it be because of current times or whatever, it would require a formal review. So we want to pull the regulatory language out, establish it so that in the event that there needs to be a change because of a certain circumstance in a school, we can make that change without having to revisit the policy in a formal manner. So we will take care of both the red line version and get that published as well, but do know the intent is to provide an accompanying administrative rule or regulation for each policy.
Okay.
Awesome.
Good.
All right, and finally, policy KG, use of school facilities.
I'm sorry, Mr. Aiken, let's go back to...
I'm sorry?
Who are the people that serve on the attendance and zoning committee?
It's established by the board and the superintendent. The board directs the superintendent creates, actually there's two committees. There's one committee to oversee the total project, and then there's subcommittees that go out to actually do the work within looking at different parts of areas, zones, and things like that to bring back to the actual committee that eventually brings to the superintendent and the board.
So the next question, follow-up questions to the superintendent. Do you have a list of recommended people for this committee, for those committees?
At the time, I do not. I wanted to be able to determine, capacity of individuals to serve, along with the traditions and I guess you can say historical processes that we've had in place. I was actually hopeful that we'd be able to get further along into this reapportionment component, as well as collecting some further data from Mr. Ballard on. But ultimately, it will be part of the regulation that I just mentioned. Those I look to see as a 1 to 2 year term, rolling on and rolling back off. But a list of names at the moment I do not have.
And the particular cabinet department that it falls under is administrative services, right? Or is it?
That would actually be student support services.
Support services.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
All right, thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
And before you go on, Mr. Akins, I want to go back to Dr. Sauce on the IGB student support teams. I think it would be a better idea to do an addendum, attach an addendum to the policy instead of including the names of the people on the support team, because it would be fluid because those people would maybe change periodically quicker than we revise these policies.
I didn't want it inside the policy. I just want it made available at the schools.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want
it made available at the schools. We're not adding it to the policy, just making it available so that the public, scholars, parents are aware of who they can go to for their advocacy efforts.
Okay, understood. But I get some clarity on that. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay, go ahead, Ms. Akins.
Finally, bringing policy KG, use of school facilities. The use of policy KG, use of school facilities, is just being revised to provide clarity and efficiency and some wording corrections there. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Akins, good afternoon. I know that recently Mr. Holmes and I met with Mr. Simmons, and I brought up the use of our auditorium right behind us for our community to utilize. For example, Camelot Theater, that's now in the Program Challenge building. And I know that this board is very community-oriented. I know that our superintendent is very community-oriented. We're getting ready to take a trip to Macon Thursday to witness some of the community in schools down there, little field trip. I would like the use of our auditorium to be included in this for our community to utilize the auditorium. For example, I know the Fowlers at Camelot Theater cannot afford our auditorium. I get that. But it would allow them to, because a lot of our own students participate in Camelot Theater. I know the production they have coming up in September, I think 50 or 60 of our own students are in that production that go to our schools every day. So is there some way that we can include the use of our auditorium within this particular policy?
Are you referring at no cost?
No, I'm not
Okay.
referring to it no cost at all. I just know that, for example, Camelot Theater can't afford to use our auditorium. And I know down in Bibb County, where Mr. Simmons is from, they have a website you can go to. He showed it to us in his office. You go to the website, you reserve this particular performing arts center, you reserve this particular high school for, and I hope that, of course, our system is not that big, but I think we're all really big on community.
That was my question, what Mr. Doss asked. Was that free of charge or
No,
like a rental?
not at all.
It is already available for those. We have.
Well, I know, but I'm not real sure it's affordable. That's my point. For a lot of the groups that may use our facility. So what I want to try to do is come to a happy medium. I believe the fee here is $1,000 a day. I'm not really sure what it is.
That's something that can be addressed in our regulation. There is a regulation, KGR1, that goes along with this that spells out all of our facilities that are available for that, and we can definitely take a look at that within that regulation.
I just want to be inclusive of the community, and I think all of the board wants to be inclusive of the community because, how do you build community? You include your community. And I just want them to have the opportunity to use our facilities if and when they are available. And, Camelot Theater would do well in our auditorium behind us. They'd be able to sell more tickets, they'd make more money. No, I'm not saying it should be free at all. But I just hope that we can build community by including the community.
Yes, ma'am. I
Thank you.
understand. We can definitely take a look at that
Thank you,
regulation.
appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, just one thing, and this kind of goes along with Ms. McDonald's comments. One consideration when you look at revising the rental policies, not necessarily the policy, but our rental practices, is when you start backing off and loosening it up, you can't just say, well, we're going to let Camelot Theater, because we consider that to be a good, worthy community organization, and then maybe another organization that may not be quite as wholesome. I mean, you got to open it up to all comers. So I would suggest that you get Bruce in on this. Bruce has dealt with the use of facilities for years now, and he's kind of been through it all. So I would just suggest that
I would
before we
agree.
start changing it, you consult with Bruce.
I'm not really wanting to change, I just want to be inclusive. That's my goal as a board member, is to be inclusive of our community.
Where Miss Aiken go? Why you running, man? Come back over here. I ain't seen you move that fast in 1972.
Yes, sir.
I wanted to ask that something be explored as well. Ms. Sue kind of triggered my memory. Somebody had contacted me, and I put a notation in my phone, but I've been contacted by a couple of retired teachers, retired educators, and some disabled veterans, and just asking if you and Mr. Ballard or whoever can explore and look at the possibility of offering these retired educators or disabled veterans the opportunity to attend sporting events free of charge. Either we can have them have certain tickets set aside where they can come by, and secure them electronically or however. And it's not a large number of those people. I think you probably seen them attend and sit on the other side, before we moved it. It's probably not even a handful. But this was something that was brought to me, and I thought it was worth mentioning because these people have served us and the kids in our system, and then we have these veterans who have served our country.
Yes, sir.
And I think it would be admirable if we could offer something like that. So I would respectfully ask that you all look at what and if we can do along with the superintendent approval, look at something that we can offer retired educators and veterans.
Well, as you know, the system does not receive any funds for that.
Right.
That's the individual schools, but we'll be happy to work with those schools to
With those
try
schools.
to come up with something. Yes, sir.
Okay, well, I'll let you put the pieces of the puzzle together, and we can kind of hash over them. Just kind of put together something that we can consider and look at if we can do something like that.
Yes,
But
sir.
I just thought it was worth bringing to the board on behalf of those retired educators and those veterans.
Well, I can definitely reach out to Mr. Payne. Our system athletic director falls under my division, so we can actually work through it that way
Okay.
with the athletic directors of each school.
Okay. Thank
Sure.
you. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Actually, I think that's a great idea. Actually, I have my pass from Forsyth County Schools still on my key ring for the
Right.
very same thing you're talking about. That's pretty cool. Thank you.
Got to get you one of those for Griffin-Spalding.
That's right.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr.
All
Chairman,
right.
the
Be a lot
board
shorter.
needs to formally approve these, 4 policies on first reading.
Okay, we got one more to go.
Oh, was it another policy?
Okay, no, that's not a policy. I'm sorry. Board member, we had 3 from the staff as far as being put on first reading. Could we get a motion to accept those to be put on first reading?
So,
Today.
Got a motion by Mr. Brown,
second.
second by Ms. McDonough. All in favor? All right, 4-0. Okay, next up, we have the CARES 3 budget recommendation by Dr. Tiffany Taylor and Ms. Barbara Austin.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I am here along with Ms. Austin, Director of Federal Programs. We have been providing some updates in the month of June and July as it pertains to the use of our CARES Fund. And so we wanted to come before you again tonight. The superintendent recommends approval of the ESSER CARES 3 budget in the amount of $32,796,518. Just for some reference, we know that these are federal funds that have been provided to the school system to prevent, prepare for, and to respond to the current pandemic. And so, if you look at the background, bullet 4, just as a reminder that these are the areas in which the funds can be used. And you're going to hear a little bit tonight about some of the proposals that we have for the use of these funds in the area to address at-risk student populations, distant remote learning, school meals, mental and physical health, supplemental learning, facilities and equipment, professional development, and continuity of core staff and services. And so while you will see a recommendation here tonight, I do want to just remind us that we are required under this federal grant that we do review the budget, our use of funds, and review our situation frequently. And so we will be coming back to you often with some updates, but then no later than January, we will be updating our application and our use of funds with the federal government. Prior to Ms. Austin coming up, I do want to just remind us that we did have several committees that have been led by Dr. Sauce, who led the Mental Health Committee. Harper led remote learning. Risk groups. Ms. Dobbins, services, and I led the committee for professional development. And so we are able with these funds, there were some immediate needs that we had in terms of the virtual academy and also learning loss. There are some particular stipulations. We know that no less than 20% had to be used in that particular area. And so we do intend to reimburse the general fund on some of those expenditures that we had to have to go ahead and get school up and running. So at this time, Ms. Austin is going to come and give you the breakdown of those percentages.
Before you leave, Dr. Taylor, I just want to ask one question
sir.
before Ms. Austin come up. Do they give any kind of parameters on what they mean about reviewing frequently? Do they give any kind of parameters of what frequently means?
Well, really what we should be reminded of is that, again, that these funds are to prepare for, and respond to COVID. And as we are noticing with the Delta variant, is that it changes in a sense in terms of what the needs are. So we want to be diligent with the use of these funds, but we want to make sure that we don't go so fast that we don't leave funds available to meet needs that may arise. We can spend these funds over a 3-year period. It is a 2-year grant that must be expended by the 3rd year. And so that flexibility comes in that we should be reviewing what our immediate needs are and responding to that. And so it's a little bit different from some of our other funding streams, but we do have to make sure that we are responding to the needs of our students in live timing, for lack of better terms.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions before Ms. Austin comes up?
Anybody?
All right.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Dr. Taylor.
Good evening,
Good evening.
Chair. Good evening, Board. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Just getting into it for a second.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Again, thank you for the opportunity this evening just to share out all the great work that has been done thus far to ensure that our schools are able to utilize our CARES or ESSER 3 funds that are used interchangeably when you hear CARES 3 and ESSER 3 within our schools to meet those needs that are imperative to those 3 areas of the focus of the funds. So what you'll see before you is a chart or breakdown of each of our priority areas that was shared in our application for our ESSER 3 funds back in July. Our grant application was approved, so we're excited about that. And Dr. Taylor did mention that we are mandated to spend at least 20% of our overall allocation in the learning loss items. And so as you'll see, for here in our district, we have 59% of our allocation to date allocated to learning loss or unfinished learning. You'll hear it also referred to as unfinished learning also throughout the state. And so we're excited that all the teams, the input from our teachers, our students, our stakeholders, and our parents, along with those that may even be sitting in the room, to be able to identify those items that will allow us to impact any learning loss within our district from those recommendations. And so our next largest area is our professional development and then safe return to schools. I would like to note that some of the recommendations in professional development can kind of be interchangeable with safe return to school when it comes to professional development, whether it is additional resources or training when it comes to mitigation strategies would be a part of that professional learning, but is directly tied to ensuring that our students have a safe return and or can stay within school. So we're very excited about that. And Dr. Taylor did mention about the frequency of reviewing our our recommendation rate for budgets based on where we are in the environment, where are our needs across our schools. And so it is a fluid document that we can make those decisions with defined autonomy within our district to meet the needs of our schools. So I'm glad that we have that empowerment as the leaders of our district, as well as those that are leading the charge within our schools, to ensure that we are responding to the needs at that time. So I am grateful that we can have these additional funds in our district that are in addition to our other federal dollars that we're receiving in state and local to ensure that we're meeting the needs of our schools. And so what you see before you is just a depiction of overall from our budget that we provided to everyone that was on the committee. All of those areas or uses of funds are tied back to our 3 priority areas. So those dots that Dr. Taylor shared with you earlier are tied back. And so if you would, Lonnie, go to the next slide for me. And so this gives you a graph of those percentages of those 3 priority areas and the percentage of the grants and where they're budgeted to date. We may come back in the next few months based on where we are in this pandemic environment and say, hey, we need to increase the area of safe return to schools based on the resources, materials, or human resources that may be needed. Are there any questions for me?
Yeah, I don't want you to go into the minute details, but
Yes, sir.
just give me some of the things that we are doing or going to do for the learning loss piece of that pie.
Yes, sir. So we have a few examples that I'd like to share, and here's one before you regarding learning loss. And this is an area that was part of the application process that Godot shared with us that could be utilized. So, for example, it could be the purchase of technology to include hardware, software, and connectivity resources, which may include hotspots, additional technology in the classrooms. The superintendent also mentioned a project that will be coming up regarding connectivity, so that may be something that we're looking to be able to support as well with those funds from the learning loss section. That's just one example. Another example that we have, Lynn, if you move forward, thank you, for professional development is those training and professional development opportunities for staff within our district, whether it's on sanitation and minimizing the spread of infectious disease, or if it's even in retention of staff or being able to attract new staff into our positions to be able to meet the needs of our schools. It's where our professional development dollars can be used towards. And one last example is safe return to schools. It's school facility repairs and improvement to enable operations of schools to reduce the risk of transmission of the virus. And those are just some examples, and there are some other innovative ways that as a district, if we decide this is best for our district, those are things that can be considered. Is that helpful?
Yes,
Chairman?
and I guess one thing that I'm still kind of stuck in that, pencil and paper, face-to-face
Yes, sir.
classroom time. Is there anything in the works as far as I've seen some places where kids can actually come and get classroom instruction and help on like a Saturday.
Yes, sir.
Is there something like that in the works?
Yes, sir, it most certainly is. It's called part of our extended learning opportunities within our entire school district. It could be before school, after school, Saturday school, or virtual, depending on where the needs are for our students. And so our school principals, the leaders of those schools, are very innovative right now in deciding the best use of those funds within their schools to meet the needs of those kids. So yes, those are certainly opportunities that can be utilized with our funds.
Okay.
No, don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere. I kind of wanted to just jump in. This past week, we did meet with each of our principals, elementary and secondary. They were provided their 1-year allocation for learning loss. And what that looks like is, as Ms. Austin has said, each of those principals will meet the needs of their students in a flexible manner at their school. So each school received an allocation based upon a rank order. That is the same rank order that we utilize with our title dollars. And so what principals will be doing in the very near future is rolling out opportunities for students. We know that we have students who are currently quarantined, and part of the use of these funds is to ensure that those students continue with instruction while they're home. That may be part of the question that you have, Mr. Holmes. And so that will look differently school to school, but in approving this recommendation tonight, that allows us to go ahead and really continue the use of these funds. As stated, some of these purchases have been purchased via general funds, and so we're ready to go ahead and be able to make some purchases from CARES, in particular to ensure that kids who are their learning is disrupted, that they have opportunities to learn in an extended day fashion. Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
okay.
ma'am. Certainly.
Dr. Taylor, these funds have been delivered?
Mm-hmm. They have received their allocation, and so and to give you a little bit more feedback, we also have a position posted for a virtual bridge teacher. That is a posting that also would allow each school to have access to someone who could either sub in the building when a teacher is out, or to render those activities to students, home to school connection, while they are quarantined. So yes, principals do have access to those funds. In addition to that, we're giving each school the equivalent of one teacher allotment, and so that is around the amount of $65,000. In the previous year's budget process, many principals identified some needs that they had, and at the time, we could not meet those needs through the general fund budget process. And so with CARES, we are providing that one teacher allotment that could be used in a flexible manner. So what we see some principals, they are saying, they need the full teacher. We know that we had a change in rule with EIP. So some teachers are saying, I'm going to use my allotment for EIP. I talked to a principal today who said we're seeing more behavior challenges as a result of a particular group of kids not being in school for a full year last year. I think I want to use my money for behavior support. And so it is flexible in nature. We're going to ensure that all of our students do continue instruction while they are quarantined or not in the building. But in addition to that we know there are some other needs that we have in response to the pandemic as well. Right. So those are just some examples of the allocations that principals have received.
Thank you.
Austin, don't go anywhere. Were we finished? Okay. Are there any other questions?
Question?
Okay.
No.
And so at this time, the superintendent does recommend that the Griffin-Spalding Board of Education approves the ESSER CARES 3 budget in the amount of $32,796,518. I had been practicing that amount, and I have never had that much money, so I still didn't get it right.
Understood. You've heard the recommendation, board. Can we get a motion to accept?
So moved.
Got a motion by Ms. McDonald. Get a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Dawson. All in favor? 4-0. Thank you, Dr. Taylor. And I want to say to
Thank you.
Everybody that presented, Mr. Aikens, Sauce, I thank you for the red line and going ahead and give us the corrected version that you want it to look like. That is very helpful in doing so. So I appreciate that. Just want to let you know that. Next, we have presentations. I don't know if we're going to be able to stand this one, but we have the board attorney, Tim Shepard, talking to us about reapportionment.
I'll try to be short with it, but I'm afraid it's going to turn into long.
Yes, Lord.
All right. If the board recalls, and to some extent I'm going to say this for the benefit of folks that are watching, I presented to the board back in mid-May on the issue of reapportionment. As the board is aware, after each census, it's required that local elected boards such as the school board reapportion their voting districts in light of the changes in the new census. To give you a little bit of history on it, currently our board and the county board, who each has 5 members, serve identical districts. So, for instance, the 3rd district on our board corresponds with the 3rd district on the county board. That goes back to prior to the 2010 census, when this board, based on the results of a referendum, was reduced in size from 10 members to 5 members. In the process of establishing the 5-member board, the local legislation made the school board's districts identical to those of the county commission. When both boards were looking at reapportioning after the 2010 census, the county and the school board was able to agree to hire the same consultant, and through a cooperative or collaborative process, both boards were able to agree on the same districts, so that coming out of reapportionment after the 2010 census, we were able to keep the same districts. And it doesn't take a lot of thinking to figure out why that is a desirable outcome. It sure helps the voters in the community and cuts down on confusion. So with that in mind, in mid-May, Jimmy Fortune, who's one of the county attorneys, and I spoke with a gentleman from an outfit called Flow Analytics. It's one of the few companies operating around that does a lot of this reapportionment work. The lady that we used in 2011 has retired, and she wasn't available. So Mr. Fortune and I had a joint conversation with the fellow from Flow Analytics. His name was John McKenzie. Again, to give you a little bit of information, how we found him, I found him kind of by accident, because when we found out that the lady that we had used in 2011 wasn't doing it again, I'm calling around to local government attorneys, and nobody knows anybody. There was an article in the AJC in early May about the city of Brookhaven doing their redistricting or reapportionment, and it had the name of their city attorney in the article, so I called him to ask him who they used and whether or not he was happy with the job they did, and he told me that he could wholeheartedly recommend them. He was very happy with the services they performed. So based on that, we contacted them. Mr. Fortune and I talked to Flow Analytics. I presented to y'all in mid-May, and we've kind of been waiting on the county since. Of course, the county, they were a little bit slow. They didn't meet and actually make a decision until yesterday. I gave them a little bit of a pass because they were going through much the same thing we did at the end of the last calendar year when we were in the superintendent search process, trying to get a new superintendent in. They've been doing the same thing with the county manager process. All right, all that is the background to say this. The county voted not to go in with us to hire Flow Analytics. They chose to allow the state, which is a free service, to look at the new census data and draw their new districts, new reapportioned districts. I think and I talked to Clay Davis, who's the county chair. I talked to him today at length, and the way he explained it to me, their board was pretty much split. There were some board members that weren't real comfortable relying on the information or what they would get back from the state. A couple other board members weren't comfortable with flow analytics for whatever reason. What the county is hoping to do is they're hoping that we're going to hire flow analytics. They're going to get their information from the state, and then they're going to sit down with what they get from the state, and we're going to sit down with them with what we get from flow analytics and try to put it all together and magically come up with 5 identical districts. So this is not on for the board to take any action tonight. It's just bringing you up to date, but we are getting down to the nitty-gritty. When I came to the board back in mid-May, I was hoping we were going to kind of get a jump on everybody else, hopefully enter into a joint agreement with the county, hire a consultant, have them in place and ready to go as soon as the census numbers come out. Well, we've already missed that. So if we have any prayer of getting some proposed districts together to present to the legislature when they have their special session for the purpose of redistricting, we're going to have to move fast, and right now, I don't know that we can really do it. So we're probably going to end up having to present our proposed districts when the legislature meets in January. That's not a done deal, but right now, just looking at it realistically, we'd have to move pretty fast. Now, I talked to Mr. McKenzie today after my conversation with Clay Davis. And I asked him, I said, just give me a good faith estimate on the cost if our board decides to go it alone and hire Flow Analytics as a consultant to draw our districts. What would the estimated cost be? And he told me $15,000.
How much?
$15,000.
That's all?
Yeah, and it kind of surprised me too, because I told him, I said, we were expecting a little bit more than that when we went, if we were going halves with the county. And we looked at what he called the scope of work. It was going to require more meetings if we were doing it with the county, because we were going to have joint meetings with the county that would require their personnel to attend either virtually or in person. And so he said, look, y'all can use us as much as you want to, but we bill by the hour. And so when I was talking with him, we were talking on the basis of maybe them participating in 2 virtual meetings and 1 in person. The virtual meetings would be one virtual meeting where it would be kind of an introductory type meeting where they would try to get, at least let y'all know how the process was going to go. Then they would try to get the lay of the land as far as what y'all were looking for. Then an in-person meeting, when they come up with proposed maps, and it's not required they be in person to do that. I just know from going through it before, y'all probably want somebody here because they're going to bring about 3 or 4 different, if you hire them, 3 or 4 different choices for y'all to look at, and it's nice to have a live body here to call over there and say, tell me about this, or what if we move the line to take in this subdivision, or whatever. And then there would be the second virtual meeting that would be in conjunction with a public hearing to allow public input. Now, you may decide that you want somebody here in person for that. I asked him just, how it would go if they participated virtually and we had some people from the public who also either had questions or comments virtually. He said that's the way they did it in Brookhaven, and it went pretty smooth. So again, you can get them here in person. It kicks the cost up a little bit, but I just wanted to give y'all some information for y'all to kind of stew on.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Shepherd, for the update, but what I need is something in written form. Maybe a timeline, something in written form as to, the conversations that you had, just so that I am aware, because what myself and my commissioner, Gwen Flowers-Taylor, plan to do, we plan to do town hall meetings with our constituents and just let them know about the process that's coming up. So I would like for me to be able to say to my constituents of the 1st District, here is where we are with the school board. Our school board attorney is leading this process, and here are the items the steps that we've taken. So if I can get that as soon as possible, we can go ahead and start rolling out our town halls.
Sure, I'll get to you tomorrow.
Thank you so much.
Hey, just go ahead and disseminate it to all boards members so everybody have it. What I was interested in hearing from the board, I've talked to Mr. Shepherd and I've talked to Mr. Doss. It doesn't set right with me that the county want us to pay the $15,000 to get the information from Flow Analytics, and them not willing to share in that cost. I don't have any problems with them using the county, them offering it free, but we've dealt with them before in the past. Wasn't the best of information, but as the old saying goes, you get what you pay for. And but I was interested in hearing from the other board members, how did they feel about if we decided to go with Flow Analytics, sharing the full cost of getting that information, and the county not willing to at least get on board to pay a portion of that cost.
Mr. Chairman, if I can jump in, it really may not even be possible to do that. After Jimmy Fortune and I spoke to Flow Analytics back in May, they sent a proposed contract. I haven't brought that contract to y'all because we've been waiting on the county. But there is a provision in the contract that if it stands as offered, we would not be able to share with the county. Basically, they would have a proprietary interest in what they do for us. Now, I'm not sure that you want to agree to that because you are paying them to put together that information, so it really ought to be available to you. But I would assume that this probably is not the first time that this type thing has come up, and they want to keep somebody else from coming in and essentially freeload.
And Mr. Shepherd, I also want to make sure all the board members and everyone realize we're looking at the potential of having 2 different districts, which would be a disservice to the citizens, with us having the same amount of elected officials and having 2 different districts. And that would be a nightmare, voting, but I want to avoid that, and that we can hopefully come to a consensus or resolution to, be unified on how this reapportionment is done. But I think that needs to be something that everyone is aware of. But it really doesn't set right with me that, that's how they want to proceed. But correct me if I'm wrong, the city is going to go with Flow Analytics.
That is my understanding.
That was my understanding. So I don't kind of understand why the county, what I do.
So I have just a couple questions, Mr.
Yeah,
Chair.
go ahead.
So Flow Analytics will provide us with 2, 3, 4 options. If the state does it, they give you one option?
My understanding, and Mr. Brown may actually know more about this than I do. He hangs around up at the Capitol a lot, but my understanding is state's going to give you an option, and you're not going to have a lot of input.
Not gonna have a lot of input. We've been through that before.
And so if the county gets an option and we get an option, and they're not the same option, would we then have the ability to then choose which option we wanted if we wanted to come together?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And so the waiting process means that you don't get as many options. The waiting process means that takes much longer. We're at the mercy of whenever the state gets to us. And the old adage, you get what you pay for, and free is not always up to speed. Is there any other things that need to be taken into consideration that hasn't been mentioned?
Perhaps time. If this board chooses to go the free route with the state, or if we choose to go with, I start to say go with flow analytics, and then end up having to wait on the county, you're looking at a time factor, and I'll just give you an anecdotal that happened with Pike after the last census. They apparently their district lines with their school board were moved at the last minute before the elections. They ended up having a board member elected from a district that they didn't actually live in. They didn't know it when they qualified, and it may have even been something that happened between qualifying and election. It was a mess, but we want to stay away from that. That's one of the reasons I was hoping that we could get our stuff together and be able to present it to the legislature when they meet. And just in a long-winded way of answering your question, I guess maybe if we all understand the procedure to actually get the new districts, once this board agrees on the 5 districts, we would present that to our legislative delegation. It would then go up to the legislature in a local act that would describe the 5 districts, and then we would wait for it to be passed by both houses and signed by the governor. And again, since we have elections on the for the board with 3 seats next year, it would be nice if we had all this done before qualifying next year.
Mentioning our local delegation, have we heard, or you heard, or Mr. Simmons, have you all heard anything from our 3 delegates?
No, and in fact, it would be premature to really talk to them, since we were waiting to hear something from the county until yesterday.
Right. Okay.
Well, actually,
So
this morning, the county took it up
It
yesterday.
wouldn't be a good idea to kind of just talk with them beforehand?
We can do that, but they're going to, let's see, were both of our representatives in office in 2011? Was Karen Mathiak in office in
I don't
2011?
Karen
think-
wasn't.
Karen wasn't.
John Yates was at that time.
Okay.
Yeah, Yates.
So David was. So David
was.
would be familiar with the reapportionment process.
Yeah.
I know Mr. Shepherd and Mr. Chair, when we spoke earlier this afternoon, I've got to say that I'm really disappointed that the county people would vote to not hear what's on the table and what's available to all of us. And I remember one of my first meetings when Ryan McLemore was here, that we don't use the state auditors because the wait time is over a year to audit our system. So we pay privately for that. I just don't feel good about the state doing this because they're not players down here. They're players up there. And I thought from your initial recommendation to us, or giving us choices of what's out there to do this, is that this county was willing to sit down and hear one of those presentations. So I just feel like they've made a decision without having all the cards on the table, and that kind of frightens me a little bit. I like Mr. Holmes and Mr. Brown and Mr. Doss. You get what you pay for, but I'm not interested in the state doing this for us, because they really aren't, they're not in it to win it. They're in it to just do it. I went to the Flow Analytics website today. It's clean. It's very professional. I studied a lot of it. I don't see anything wrong with using Flow Analytics, and I'm kind of disappointed. That's pretty much all I really wanted to say. But hopefully this week, with us going down to Macon, we can have those conversations. Thank you.
So are we hoping to make a decision on this at the next business meeting?
It would be desirable.
Okay.
But we want to make sure, which direction that we're choosing to go.
Okay. Thank you.
You have anything, Mr. Superintendent? Okay. You ain't got no dog in the fight.
I have a lot of dogs in the fight, but I'm waiting until they can find somebody.
Okay. I think this retreat can be beneficial in many ways. So we need to take advantage of being able to sit down with our cohorts, one-on-one or as a group. And what I was thinking is that we could maybe set up something outside of the scope of the Archway retreat, where we can just sit down and just have a meeting of the mind with them. Are you not going to travel, are you, Mr. Shepherd? Are you going down?
To Macon?
Yeah.
No, sir.
Okay. All right.
But then, do y'all want me to get back with Flow Analytics, kind of let them know where we stand, and attempt to try to negotiate a contract with them just to present to y'all? I mean, the understanding would be I don't have authority to agree to anything,
Right.
but there's some things in that contract that we would have to negotiate anyway.
Right.
And since time is getting to be of the essence, at least have that out of the way.
Yeah.
I think
board
that's a great
members,
idea.
Everybody.
Because I'd like to have that in our packet for the next, before we ever vote on it.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so, go ahead. You can do that. Okay, thank you all for that discussion. Next, we have the Georgia Milestone presentation by Ms. Michelle Jones.
Before Ms. Jones goes, I just want to thank her and her staff today. We met to go over the data for District 1 schools. And so I just want to say thank you so much, Mrs. Jones, for your time today as we looked at how well our schools are doing overall. And so this is always a conversation and presentation that I love, because it's all driven by data. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. I enjoyed it very much, Mr. Brown. Good afternoon at this point. Mr. Simmons, board, appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with y'all. I'm always at a weird angle, sorry. As you know, the Milestones public release occurred yesterday, so this meeting tonight was timely. I'm excited about being able to share the information with you regarding Milestones. Of course, as we start the work, we always go back to our mission. Our focus, of course, is to empower our students to graduate college and career ready. Milestones is one of those measures that we use for that process, and so that's the mission that we keep in the forefront as we look at any data source involving our students. Our strategy map, of course, that top quadrant talks about student performance, and so that's primarily what we're going to be looking at today as we move through the data. A couple of things before we go into the specifics. When we're talking about Georgia Milestones, it's a summative assessment program that looks at data in grades 3 through high school. So that means after all the instruction has been completed, so it's at the end of that process. We normally call 3rd through 8th grade EOG, end of grade courses, and then high school EOC. So you're going to see some of those abbreviations in some of the charts. Just want to make sure we are clear on that. We're really looking at how well students know the knowledge and skills in ELA, math, science, and social studies. This specific presentation is going to concentrate on ELA and math. Science and social studies will be something we'll look at secondarily. We're going to be looking at the 4 levels of performance: beginning, developing, proficient, and distinguished. The presentation and the data that's been shared with you is looking at that proficient and distinguished levels, those performance levels of 3 and 4. And sort of to set the context, we're going to look at a historical comparison between our performance, Griffin-Risa, and the state. But before we even get into those specific things, I want you, as we look at this data, to look through this lens. I want you to think about, what did our learning look like last year? There were a lot of stops and starts with processes. So when you're thinking through the data, we need to keep that forefront in our mind. We also need to think about what some of the challenges were that occurred last year. What percent of the school's total population was tested? You're going to see some numbers that look very different. So not necessarily all of our students who normally would be tested were included in the information that we're going to be looking at. And then what was the previous achievement of the tested population? So one of the things that Richard Woods, the superintendent from the Georgia Department of Education, put out when he released this information yesterday was to make sure that you keep those things in mind. Look at this data as a standalone almost because of those variabilities. The learning last year was very different. Every district had different challenges. Even schools within our districts had different challenges. And when we're talking about testing, not all of our students were tested. So those are just sort of some lenses I want you to look at as we move through this data. So this is just a snapshot of where we were last year. We know the situation. We had students that were working from home. We had teachers that were making sure that things were safe. We had students that were making sure things were safe. So it was a different context last year when we look at learning. And our participation rate is different, as it has been, more than it has been in previous years. So all of Griffin-Spalding County students were offered the opportunity to test. Everyone had the opportunity to participate in that. Of course, it was not, if these students were virtual students, those parents may or may not have brought them onto campus to take those assessments, and so that participation rate is varied. You can see here, by grade level, the number of students that we had enrolled during that test administration date, and the students that participated during that test session, and then what percentage that was of students who tested. So interestingly enough, we had a much higher participation rate in elementary than middle school. You can kind of see that looking at the chart. But our third graders, who the first time they've ever taken Milestones, they were our highest test participation. So they really wanted to make sure that they were included in that process. I thought that spoke highly of our stakeholders and our teachers supporting the students in that work. So now we're going to kind of look at the state process. You can see here that we have data from 18, 19, and 21. Of course, we're missing 20. That was the year that we did not administer Milestones. And you can see throughout the state that there were declines in performance. Across the board, there was about a 4% change. 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 8th grade declined by 6%. Generally speaking, and 7th grade really kind of that was the only grade that maintained a pre-COVID performance level in terms of ELA within the state. When we look at how the state performed in math, you're going to see that there were bigger drops in the math performance throughout the state. 3rd and 6th grade declined by double digits, so there was a lot of dropped performances in those 2 particular grades, and those are almost our transition grades when you look at them. And 3rd grade had the largest decrease, and 8th grade had the smallest. So that's very encouraging as we look at some of our students moving into high school and those math courses there. So that's the state performances. But we also need to look at what did the districts do around us. So when we look at the Griffin-Risa information, of course, we need to keep in mind that the Griffin-Risa, the districts involved in Griffin-Risa, some are large, some are small, some are urban, and some are rural. So it's a good combination of districts that are included in this. So you're seeing a similar process in the Griffin-Risa data in their ELA scores. They had a decline from previous years. 5th grade in particular had the largest decline when we look at the Griffin-Risa. And then our middle schools within Griffin-Risa were much stronger. Our 6th, 7th, and 8th grade performed with the smallest decline of only 2%. So that's encouraging as well. When we look at our math scores within Griffin-Risa, you see a much larger decline than we have with our ELA scores. Our elementary schools actually demonstrated double-digit changes, so we had a lot more learning loss at the elementary level in math. And our third grade, looking at math and ELA together, that was a grade that was most impacted in terms of performance from previous years. So that's our Griffin-Risa performance. Now, when you're thinking about the state data and the Griffin-Risa data and those questions that I posed at the beginning, we were talking about test participation, all those kinds of things, I want you to be thinking through those as we look at our scores. So our ELA scores trended and kind of demonstrated the same performance that we saw within the state and Griffin-Risa. Our 7th grade also had the smallest decline, which is right on trend with what we saw within the state. And our overall performances had the same processes that were in place within the state and Griffin-Risa, and this is for our ELA performance. Our math, on average, had a lower performance level than we had in our ELA, but if you remember, that's the trend that we saw within the state and Griffin-Risa's as well. We've got that large 3rd grade decline. We saw that at the state with Griffin-Risa as well. And once again, that 7th grade really had the smallest reduction in performance, so that's encouraging. And that was the case for ELA and math. So those are our 8th graders sitting in our buildings now this year, so that's something to be positive with. This particular slide is just a snapshot of this year's performance only. The previous slides were looking at historically where we were. This is just a snapshot of where we are now in terms of the state, Griffin-Risa, and us. And we know that there's a reduction based on the situations that our schools have been through. So the next 2 slides are looking at some of the performances of our subgroups. You know, when we talk about performances of schools in general, we need to make sure that we're addressing the needs and looking at all the different pieces of the work. And so the first 2 columns are looking at 2019 ELA and 2021 ELA. And then the last 2 columns are 2019 math and 2021 math. So that kind of gives you a 2-year comparison by subgroup, by grade level. And when we look at this information, the thing that I want you to draw back to is our test participation. In general, we averaged about 200 less students that participated in our elementary tests than we had previously. So that is a big adjustment that we need to look at in terms of that. And really, when you're looking at pre-COVID to where we were last year in that test administration, our scores declined by approximately about half. And the largest performance decline was in our 3rd grade white subgroup in math that had the biggest change, which was a 32% for these particular numbers. When we look at our middle school numbers, the same layout, we see that our test participation averaged about 280 students less. So that's a big impact when you're thinking about performance numbers. The layout is the same, 2019 ELA to 2021. The largest decline that we saw in this particular information was in our multiracial subgroup in 6th grade in ELA. We had a 48% change there. And when we look at the subgroups as a whole, 58% of the subgroups performance in math were lower than their subgroup performance in ELA. So once again, that's on trend from the things that we've seen within the state and the Griffin-Risa. So that's the EOG pieces. I'm going to take just a second and transition to our end of course. And this was just a good opportunity to make sure everyone was aware of this particular change. One of the things that the state did last year to adjust for the changes that were going on in the schools is that they reduced the weight of the end of course assessment on your final grade. So if a student takes an end of course class like U.S. history or algebra, that the milestones part of that used to be 20%. So last year they reduced it to 0.01. So if the students were not able to take that assessment, the intent was that it would not impact the students' grade. So it was really looking to see what we could do to protect the students and support the families. Well, beginning this month, we have reverted back to that weight being 20%. So moving forward with all of our students now that are in end of courses, that weight of that assessment is going to be 20%. That regulation has already been updated and approved by our senior cabinet here and is in the process of being put back into our board policy. That's what it was previously. But I thought while we were looking at the data, I wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that change that occurred. Okay. All right, so once again, we're going to do the same sort of process. We're looking at the state of Georgia EOCs. There are only 4 courses that we look at now. We currently do American Lit, Algebra 1, Biology, and U.S. History. So throughout the state, the largest decline was in American Lit. The second largest decline was in U.S. History. And 3 of the 4 EOC scores declined by double digits within the state. So they dropped by 19, 10, and 18 respectively. When we look at Griffin-Risa, we're seeing a similar score. We had an 18% decline in our American Lit EOC performance. 3 of the 4 EOC courses also had double digits. That's right in line and trending with the state. And algebra had the lowest performance decline of 7%, which is encouraging based on our elementary math. So that's good to know that we've got some strength there, relatively speaking, in terms of math in high school. So when we're looking at our data within Griffin-Spalding, our Algebra 1 also had the smallest decline. That biology number looks very strange, I'm sure, but that year in 2019 was when we changed the science sequence, and so we moved biology from 9th grade to 10th grade, and so you've got a very small number of students that participated in that. That's why that looks that way. And then out of the 3 of the 4 EOC courses, we did have declines, but our declines were not as strong or were not in the double digits as it was with the state and Griffin-Risa. So our declines were single-digit declines, which I think is something that to celebrate given the situations of where we were in the process. Once again, this is a snapshot of the performance with the state, Griffin-Risa, and us for just this year, so we could kind of visually see what that looks like. And then I want to talk about our subgroup data with EOCs. So as we looked at these specific things, we had an increase in performance in American Lit. So this whole presentation has been talking about what the state has trended, what Griffin has trended, what our data has trended. We had an increase in our Hispanic subgroup in American Lit by 12, which is excellent given the situation. So I was very excited to see that increase in performance. Our largest decline was also in American Lit in our multiracial subgroup. And there were single-digit declines in 33% of the subgroup performances when compared to 2018 and 2019. So the state and Griffin-Risa, theirs were double. They were in the 10s and the 12s and the 14s. Ours were in single digits. We knew that there was going to be a decline in performance, but our high schools held strong in terms of making sure that those changes weren't as drastic as we saw within the state and Griffin-Risa. Now, as you're sitting there, that data is kind of scary. The thing to know is that the data is one part of that process. This Milestones data is one measure. We always look at multiple measures for student achievement data to get triangulation of processes. We look at MAP data. We look at school classroom performance data. We also look at things that aren't necessarily measured on an assessment, like the social emotional well-being of our students, the processes that we're addressing. So as we look at this data, I want us to be mindful of the fact this is one source, not the only source. So as far as the district supports and resources, of course, earlier you heard Dr. Taylor and Ms. Austin talking about the CARES information, specifically about what that's going to be able to do. So that's a huge piece of this work. We also are really looking at content-specific instructional focus areas. Dr. Taylor has shared that information with you at previous board meetings. So it's really going to allow us to tailor in specifically for the things that are going to get the biggest support for our students. The targeted professional learning that's going to go along with both of those pieces of the work. Of course, we've got a virtual academy in place. We've got performance reviews where we'll be able to support the schools in looking at those data along the way so that we've got sort of support so we're not waiting till the very end of the process. And then instructional walks, because really you know what a school is like by being in that school and seeing those pieces of the work. So those are some of the supports that are in place from the district point of view. But that's district. From the school, of course, each school is addressing their needs a little bit differently. They're looking at making sure the instruction and instructional strategies are targeting the needs of the students. They've got Milestones data, but they also have other data that they're going to use to make those decisions for instruction. We're going to continue to refine that student goal-setting process that's been in place, once again making those students become self-directed and being involved with those particular processes of their learning. We're going to be able to provide additional teachers to support the acceleration of supplemental small group instructions that Dr. Taylor and Ms. Austin referenced those as well. And then, of course, we also talked about the extended learning opportunities, spent some time talking about what that could potentially look like. So our principals have done a great job addressing the needs of their students and their schools. The teachers have worked very hard. Our building leaderships has worked very hard. Throughout this whole process, they have rolled up their sleeve and moved forward with the work, and I think that process is going to continue. I'm excited about the flexibility that we have with the data, with the money that was shared earlier, and the way that they're looking at ensuring that this is a bump and not the end, so they're moving forward in the work. Okay? Questions? I know that was a lot of numbers. A lot of numbers.
I don't necessarily have any questions, Chairman, but I just want to, when you're looking at the numbers and you're seeing the increase and you're seeing the growth, that's what I get excited about. Get excited when teachers and scholars are able to see their growth in the classrooms and in the content. And within District 1, there's just been a lot of great things that are happening educationally to support the data that you saw on the board today. And so I just want to give a couple kudos to just the schools and principals in District 1. We definitely know, like, for example, Mainstay Academy, although they don't test, but we know that we definitely have seen some great things happening there socially, behaviorally, and academically. And so kudos to Mr. T and his staff for doing everything that they do to ensure that the scholars there are welcome, that the scholars there feel safe, and also so that we can see the social, behavioral, academically things that are happening there. At Atkinson Elementary, shout out to making sure that our teachers and scholars are proactive in their learning. Fifth grade students perform better in ELA than math at Atkinson. Also, third grade student performance is on trend with the state and Griffin-Risa. And shout out to those 8 students who performed in level 3 in ELA. At Moore Elementary, the social and emotional well-being of their faculty and staff was really a main focus. Shout out to Dr. Brody for her Summer Learners Academy, where Learners Advantage, where teachers were able to have professional development and then use the gradual release responsibility model, the I do, you do, we do. I went over there during the summer and saw where the consultants were working with the teachers and had them in small groups, and then the very next day, teachers were teaching and redelivering what they learned in their professional development. So we definitely want to give a shout out to that. At Jackson Road Elementary, shout out to Julie Robinson over there, positive and celebrating the teachers and parents and scholars. And their strong literacy focus has been a very strong suit for those scholars at Jackson Road. Third grade student performance is on trend with the state and Griffin-Risa. And fifth grade had more than 25% of the students who performed at level 3 and level 4. So definitely give a shout out to them. At Kennedy Road Middle School, sorry, not Callan Road, but at Kennedy Road Middle School, to Dr. Gardner, who is a great instructional leader that has really made student growth a major focus of his. And lower test participation in previous years, but the trends from 2018 and 2019 are consistently demonstrated in growth, and so that is something to be celebrated. And 52 scholars performed at levels 3 and 4 in ELA, and so that is something definitely that he should be commended about, and the teachers there. And over the years, we look at A.Z. Kelsey with the graduation rate in 2018 of 58.7, 2019 56%, and now a 65.6%. So we see that we are moving on up, in the words of the Jeffersons. And so just thank you to the scholars who have been through a lot this year. In the beginning of the presentation, she gave us 4 questions for us to think about. What did learning look like? What were the challenges? What were the percentage of the schools that actually took the test? and then what was the previous achievement. And so I just want to say to the District 1 schools and to all schools, thank you so much for staying the course and for doing your best. And a shout out to, of course, Ms. Jones and your team, especially those school improvement coordinators that are in the schools that are helping to support our teachers with their short-term action plans. And so just thank you so much for everything that you're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Jones.
Getting my timer out. Can you all hear me okay? Okay. Again, good afternoon, members of the board, Chairman Holmes, Superintendent Simmons, members of the community. It's my privilege today to be able to speak to the community and to the board about student level protocols that are in place that we're utilizing as it relates to COVID-19. So I'm proud to be able to stand here, and momentarily my colleague, Ms. Dobbins, will be able to speak to employee protocols. It's important that we always begin our presentations with a reminder of our mission and our vision statement. Our mission, of course, is to empower students to graduate college and career ready. Our vision is to be an agent of change in the Griffin-Spalding County school system, transforming our students into future-ready learners and contributing members of society. And the way that we do that, one way that we do that is through our non-negotiables, which are to be professional, to be accountable, and to communicate effectively, which I seek to do this afternoon. We have our strategy map there, which outlines our performance objectives and key areas of focus in our strategic plan, which of course will be updated soon as we soon bring a new strategic plan to the board for consideration. With that being said, I would like to quickly begin by just giving an acknowledgement and a shout out to our school nurses who are represented here today by our school nursing supervisor, Ms. Leisha Evans. Our school nurses have just done a marvelous, marvelous job in the first few weeks of school, working very hard to help ensure all of our students and staff are safe. So I want to acknowledge them. They're out there watching. Thank you, Ms. Evans, for being here and representing them. So firstly, this slide here, I say this kind of tongue-in-cheek, but also it's a serious point. We are given guidance and information and points of consideration from various public health authorities and education authorities very often. Not just our school system, but all school systems, especially in our state. So this slide here is just a smattering, a representation of no less than 9 different publications from no less than 4 different agencies in no less than the last 12 months to give us different understandings, information, points of consideration for school districts to react and respond to. So this slide here isn't intended for you to be able to read all that information. All this has been published. But you have documents here from the Department of Public Health, from the CDC, from the Georgia School Boards Association, even from the Georgia Department of Education, all giving different information, different guidance, different points to consider at different times, some at the same time. So to say we have our share of resources to look at would be an understatement. So that's what this slide represents. Next, if you would, Lonnie, please. That being said, within our school system, we're doing a number of things to try to, or not to try to, but to stay on top of and respond to in real time the information that we have and what's coming at us. We communicate regularly with the Department of Public Health. We analyze our data on a daily basis, sometimes on an hourly basis. We regularly communicate with our Department of Public Health case investigators, seeking their guidance and input on a variety of matters that arise. And of course, we look at and review local, state, national data to have that broader context for us to pivot where need be and ensure that we're making changes and implementing the appropriate strategies given the times that we're in or the context that are before us. So that's what that slide speaks to. If you would, Lonnie. This slide here, these are 2 documents that have been in publication that folks have seen. On the left here, this is a document that speaks to student protocols that are in place, some of which I'm speaking to today. Parents received this information via email about a week and a half ago. This is the document here that our nurses have seen in abundance, which speaks to symptoms that are of a primary and secondary nature that we are on the lookout for if children become sick. If you would, Lonnie, and again, some of which I'll speak to in the next several slides. This slide here starts to kind of delve into the actual protocols themselves. The first point there, folks in the room are aware, of course, that as of August 9th, masks are mandatory, required of all students and staff in school buildings and school facilities, school offices, district offices as well. Special considerations for mask wearing must be addressed formally through the 504 plan process or the IEP process if a child has an IEP, and for employees through the ADA process. So just wanted to make that clear. We want and expect our parents and guardians to notify our school nurse immediately if a child is in fact positive for COVID-19 or if it's confirmed that a child is in close contact for COVID-19. Understanding that close contacts may not always happen at school, of course, could happen at home or in the community, so we ask and expect parents to notify of that information immediately. Next slide, if you would, Lonnie. Students should not come to school with primary symptoms of COVID-19, which are listed on that slide, which you can certainly review. But some of the symptoms you all have heard so much in the media in the last year and a half, but fever, shortness of breath, loss of taste or smell, severe cough as well. If a student develops these symptoms at school, which certainly can and does happen, in those cases the child would be isolated by the school nurse. The parents would be contacted, or guardians would be contacted and invited to come get their children, and of course recommended strongly by our nurses to see their health care provider. If you would, Lonnie. If a student is confirmed positive for COVID-19, they are required to isolate for a minimum of 10 days. In order to return to school for a child who's positive for COVID-19, they should be fever-free for a minimum of 24 hours without the assistance of fever-reducing medication, of course, after 10 days are elapsed. If a school, next point there, we also want to talk about 3 feet of social distancing. We're seeking to have 3 feet of social distancing where possible, where physically possible within classrooms. I'll speak to the social distancing and close contact a little bit more momentarily, but did want to point out that currently 98% of our enrolled students in the Griffin-Spalding County School System are in-person learners. That's, of course, very different from last school year. It changed some, but for most of last school year, it hovered around 70%, sometimes 68, sometimes 71, 72. Changed some at the second semester, but that is a critical difference from last year. Lonnie, if you would, please, thank you. So if an instance where a student is confirmed as a close contact at school, that's defined as being within 3 feet of a positive COVID case for at least 15 minutes within 48 hours of the child who's positive having symptoms or having that positive test, but we're using that within 3 feet marker. A child would be required to quarantine for 10 days if they are in close contact with a positive COVID-19 case. There is an exception of 7 days if the close contact child is negative, produces a negative COVID-19 test taken at least 5 days after the close contact occurred, and that would have to be at least 7 days that negative test is presented after the close contact occurred. So it's kind of a little bit of a tongue twister, but the test would have had to have occurred at least 5 days after contact, and the negative test would need to be presented to the school nurse at least 7 days after the close contact occurred. That's the exception. Also, not to confuse folks more, but to go back to different and varying guidance, even presently now, the Department of Public Health defines close contact in different ways, depending on the vaccination status of the individual, depending on the age of the individual, depending on ventilation conditions within the building that the contact occurred, depending on whether or not a mask was worn, depending on whether or not what mitigation strategies that facility uses. So even the close contact definition varies based on those factors. For purposes of our school system, we are using 3 feet for students wearing masks, of course, with at least 15 minutes having elapsed of another child or individual who's positive for COVID. If you would, Lonnie. Do want to just give a little bit of background and context, too, about potential quarantines of classes. There are a number of factors that we look at and consider, including a number of the points that you see there on the slide. But we're looking at, are there instances of multiple cases in the class? Is that right now? Was there one last week and another this week? But considering the period of time and the time frame and how many positives are present at a given time is something we look at and strongly consider. The length of time that's passed since other positive cases were present in the class. Other factors, including the grade band, potential mobility, or transitional nature of that class is considered. And also the number of close contacts that we're aware of in that class as well. We do presently have today, we do presently have 6 different elementary classrooms that are quarantined at 2 different schools for various reasons associated with the factors I just referenced. Lonnie, if you would. Just a few last points for me, and I'm going to make my time here. We do want to, again, make sure everyone's clear that we are required to report instances of positive cases and close contacts to the Department of Public Health. That's an expectation of all public school districts in our state. We certainly do so. Some folks in the community, parents might be familiar that we have this school year adopted a GSCS COVID-19 school nurse call line for the weekends. We have school nurses who volunteer to be a part of this process. They are, of course, paid additional duty, extra duty to take those calls during the weekend. It's 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Saturday and Sunday that phone line is available, and parents or guardians and employees can call and consult on COVID matters, also report positive cases, report close contacts, etc. And when parents do so, which has already happened in the last 2 weekends, it allows us, of course, to get out in front of more quickly potential close contacts we become aware of, and the nurse will also try to reach those close contacts that weekend rather than waiting till Monday. Finally, we do have vaccine clinics that are scheduled that are coming up. You see the dates there listed by school. Parents associated with those secondary schools have already received communication indicating how their child can participate if they choose for them to do so. The employees at those schools can also participate on the given dates if they choose to, if they're not already vaccinated. And finally, our elementary staffs and our central office staff also can participate, and they've been given direction how to do so if they choose to, so they're not left out just because they may not work at those sites. And I believe, Lonnie, that might be all for me. Yes, it is, so I'm going to hand it over to my colleague before we take questions.
Thank you, Dr. Sauce. I do want to second Dr. Sauce's shout out to the school nurses and their efforts to support students and employees. I know that they have been working very hard, and we appreciate all their efforts and supports during this needy time for the school system. So this document that's on the screen is similar to what Dr. Sauce already shared with you for student protocols. This is the employee protocol sheet that has been shared across the system in multiple ways, through email, through the communicator, and via direct supervisors. You can see that there are 2 QR codes on the document, and the first is the way that employees report their daily health self-check. As you recall, last year we took temperatures and answered our health questions. This year we're not taking temperatures, but we are continuing to self-report on those symptoms that Dr. Sauce already went through. And so that data is coming to us electronically in real time. If an employee answers yes, that they've been exposed, or yes, that they have symptoms, then they immediately get a message back that tells them where to go to see their school nurse, or if they're at central office, to see Ms. Evans or Edna Akins. Additionally, we have a new helper that you might have noticed on the board agenda. Joni Mullins is assisting us with this process, so we're very excited to have her part-time support with this activity. The second QR code that you see on the in association with the green side, that's the positive cases, and that is a link to the form where employees can report positive test results. And so we do work through those quickly. Those numbers are available almost in real time, so that we can keep a close eye on that situation. So again, that's basically the 2 ways that we have data coming in. It's either through that daily self-health check log or through the COVID event reporting form. We are isolating, as with students, for positive cases, a minimum of 10 days, have to be fever-free for at least 24 hours before returning to work. And employees do take sick leave for these instances because the federal leave that we had available last year ended at the end of March. We are treating employees as essential workers, so as long as they do not have symptoms, they do continue to report to work. And that is it, and we'll take your questions.
Well, that's very difficult to answer, Mr. Brown, because sometimes it's in a community or a group. They may have gotten it at church, but then it spreads through the classroom. So it's hard to really know that. But we do look to see, if, once we quarantine a child, if later they become positive. So if we have a positive case in the classroom and then we quarantine 4 children, and those kids are asymptomatic, they don't have a problem, and then 3 or 4 days later they do, then there's likelihood that they did contract it at school. Kind of how we're tracking it.
I just wanted to publicly thank Dr. Sauce. I called him last week to help me with a situation, a very involved parent at one of our elementary schools, and you know a ton more than I do, so I directed you to her, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Good afternoon, board members and community.
Good afternoon.
Just want to give you an update of some highlights, challenges regarding our start of the school year. Lonnie, if you can advance, please. First of all, our mission is to empower students to graduate college and career ready. Our vision, we want to work with students to be an agent of change, transforming them into future-ready learners and contributing members of society. How we go about that work is, go like that, yeah, having our non-negotiables that we stick to dearly in everything that we do. I think of the acronym PACE, with P being be professional, A be accountable, and C and E relates to communicating effectively. And that period there talks about a person's experiences impacting their beliefs, which impact their actions, which then determine results. Next slide, please. This is our current strategy map. As Dr. Saul stated, we're working with GSB and GSCS to update our 5-year strategy plan. And a smooth start of the school year is critical, and it impacts and is intertwined with each of these goal areas. It's intertwined with high-performing staff, organizational effectiveness, family and community engagement, as well as student performance. When I think of some quotes on planning, these sort of stick out to me, just to highlight a couple by Confucius. A man who does not plan long ahead will find trouble at his door. And a Yoga Berry quote, if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else. That is so true. But I want to just say, you know, planning a school year is a very, very stressful adventure for school and district-based personnel. And that is especially true in a pandemic. It's very stressful. However, I do want to commend the work of our principals, assistant principals, teachers, support staff, as well as district office personnel for their planning efforts that actually began back in the early spring. We started planning in the early spring. Here's a list of some successes and challenges. We all know that a positive attitude goes a long, long way. I'm here to tell you that our personnel definitely possess a positive attitude. Students were happy to return to school. As Dr. Sauce mentioned, we have about 90% of our students back in the building. And I imagine some of our parents were probably even happier to have the kids back in the building. We had very, very strong community support on our first day of school, and that's very evident of the commitment of our stakeholders. I also want to commend my custodial staff. As I mentioned, having clean and inviting classrooms. They worked mighty hard over the summer to make that happen, along with the support of our maintenance crew. Schools had organized procedures for both arrival and dismissal. And we did have some bumps and kinks that they were able to work out in the first couple of days or so. The next point there talks about getting to know me activities. Relationships are very, very crucial and important in the classroom, as in other facets of life. These get to know me activities enable teachers and students to interact and connect with each other as individuals. You know, they like to see, you know, what are your likes, what are your hobbies, what are your dislikes, and things of that nature. Also, I mentioned teaching on rituals, routines, and procedures. These are very, very important in the classroom and in the school building as a whole to provide structure to students related to communication and safety to keep them on the straight and narrow. To finish this up, our administrators are very, very visible, as well as teachers in the hallway. Chromebooks have been distributed or are about to be completely distributed to all of our students, and technology guidelines have been reviewed. Mr. Simmons, you'll see a photo shortly. He even spent a day as a third grader. So he was able to participate in that activity at Orrs Elementary School. Related to our virtual program that Ms. Crawford heads up, we have 54 elementary students enrolled, 46 middle school, and 85 high school for a grand total of 185 students in our virtual program. They have Chromebooks at their disposal for their use, and all students have been assigned classes, be it in Strive for our elementary students or Edgenuity for our middle school and high school students. And that last point is very, very critical. That's why I have it in bold and italicized. Teaching and learning started on day one here in our school district. I saw this firsthand as I spent a major portion of my first and second days of school over at GSCS. I saw student engagement in the class that I attended, such as teaching as a profession, as well as aircraft maintenance. They're very, very engaged. In a school district, as an employee, you're either working with kids to implement teaching and learning, or you're supporting those individuals that do. So I just want to highlight the efforts of 3 of our departments. First of all, maintenance. The bipolar ionization units have been installed in 11 of our schools. So as they come in, they're working steadily to install those units. Phase 1 of the Spalding High School renovation is now complete. As it relates to nutrition, we've had an increase in participation at both of our high schools, at Griffin High as well as Spalding High, and several of our elementary schools that had a low participation rate. More of those kids are currently eating school lunch. I was just over at Crescent on Friday, and with Ms. Chambers, we were talking during lunch duty, saw a couple of classes come in, and they were our younger kids, pre-K and K, and as I did a count and reflected mentally, out of 3 classes, I only saw about 3 to 5 kids that brought the lunch from home in the boxes. You know, they sit down first, they unpack, and they start eating. The rest of them went through the lines to receive a tray. So again, Mr. Willis working to provide new food choices to our students, and he's also working with our Conic Stitch agent to try to expand our farm to school program with our local farmers. That's especially key given the shortage that could be coming down the pike of food supply for the school nutrition programs. Transportation. At open house, there was a long line at some of our schools related to individuals getting the bus number and times and routes and things of that nature. Those individuals that came to open house, they were given a bus number and a route, and it was ready for them on the first day of school. So that was awesome. That was awesome. And a big kudos for Tolerance folks for turning that around so quickly, especially considering so many students moving from virtual back to face-to-face instruction. Some challenges, a quote from Oprah Winfrey here: "I don't believe in failure. It's not failure if you enjoyed the process." That's true. You know, enjoyment is important, but also more important for us is to be able to learn from the process to make things better for our stakeholder. One of the things Mr. Simmons stresses to us is agility, being able to stop, assess things, and make the necessary adjustments to improve our processes. So one of the things that we did this school year for the first and second day of school is our central office staff and senior cabinet spent the first 2 days of school at schools for their entire school day. We went out and we observed the processes, we took notes, and then at 4 o'clock that Wednesday and Thursday we convened in here in the afternoon, and everyone shared out responses to a list of questions about processes for the school. And we debriefed and discussed the positives, and we discussed the items that need support. So when someone reported, for instance, from, say, Cotton Road Middle School, if it was a maintenance, technology, transportation, or nutrition issue that was mentioned, then the appropriate director was present to hear what the issue was, and they can start problem solving to support our schools immediately. So that's a new process to us that we're going to continue on moving forward to provide support to our schools as customers. We still have some outstanding work orders in many departments. We're working to get those completed as much as possible. Just to continue the list up here, dealing with some AC units in some rooms. We're trying to work to see if it's a personal preference. Some people are hot-natured more than others, or if it's a system issue. Internet access, working to ensure we have appropriate Wi-Fi connectivity with more students. Do we need more access points in our school buildings? So Lonnie and his crew are working on that. Staffing. Staffing is a challenge for us in that due to personal illness or COVID-19, it causes some staffing issues for transportation and school nutrition, as Dr. Sauce mentioned earlier, the process that we go through with our employees. Big shout out to Todd again. I know I think it was last Thursday or Friday, we actually were out of 17 drivers. So his drivers ran, we had some subs, and we had to double up some routes, and Anthony and Todd used the bus bulletin system to inform our stakeholders that, the bus will be a little bit late coming, but just taking lemons and making lemonade, so to speak, as best we can. Couple of other items, crossing guards. We needed 2 at Cotton Road and Jackson Road. Actually, one started today at Cotton Road Middle School, so only 1 now. And Anthony's working in conjunction with our Sheriff's Department to get a school crossing guard at Jackson Road. And also, at some of our secondary schools, we have some vacancies for paraprofessionals that we're working to fill to provide support to our students. One other item I'll mention to you is water refill stations. Some have came in, but some are on back order, as we compete with other school districts and businesses around the country to get those items in. But as they come in, they're being installed at our school buildings. Lastly, I want to share with you some GSCS pride pictures. See the first one there, you see Mr. Simmons living as a 3rd grader over at Orrs Elementary. That's the first, second day of school. I see looks like Miss Dottie English on parent pickup. Got a young lady getting off the bus there. And look at that picture. You talk about community support. We believe in you. So I worked in several school districts. This is the first one that we have a community outpouring outreach on the first day of school to welcome our scholars and teachers back. That's just incredible. Okay. You're right. A couple more pictures.
If I can interrupt just a second, I just think it's appropriate to give Mr. Brown some kudos for that, because a few years ago he started that initiative.
All right. Mr. Brown? It seems like it's gotten strong and strong each year. There's more and more participation, so that's awesome. That's awesome. Some more GSCS pride pictures. I see some of our civic groups, AKAs, Deltas, things of that nature, while supporting schools. I was over at Ann Street with Dr. Royal, and lo and behold, Mr. Holmes popped in, and we had a good conversation and tour of our campus there at Ann Street. And that's one of our classrooms there. Appears to be a elementary school, I believe, providing instruction. Next slide, please. These are some photos from Spalding High School and from Cotton Road Middle School. I think that middle picture there I think that's Carver. I know by the X's on the sidewalk for social distancing, that's Carver. And that's some, looks like some math. I forgot the name of those items, Dr. Seda, those manipulatives on the screen there.
Math manipulative.
Base 10 blocks, okay, base 10 blocks, okay. Yeah, yeah. I didn't have those minutes back in the day. I taught high school math in-house, so we had a whole different set of manipulatives back then. And that last picture there is a montage of some photos there from Cotton Road Middle School. I see the custodians are masked up and working. And again, in these pictures, first, second days of school, that was prior to the mandate of masks, so that's why you see some individuals with masks and some don't have masks. Now they all have masks. See our lunchroom nutrition staff there, kids in line, and a teacher providing direction to a young lady. And I see Dr. Rawls there in the picture, observing instruction in the classroom, and he is here today. Dr. Rawls, thank you for coming. All right, that concludes my presentation to you as an update to our start of the school year. At this time, I'll pause and entertain any questions that you may have. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Warren. I just have one quick question. Are we, Mr. Akins and Dr. Warren, are we good with the custodial numbers in our schools as far as keeping our schools clean? You know, I always ask that. So I guess we're short some then?
5 or 6.
Okay. And we're still using part-time, some of the bus drivers to help us in that endeavor?
We can now.
Right, right,
Staffing issues there at the moment.
right.
So
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Warren.
Yes, ma'am, you're welcome.
Hey, I want to ask, do we have a number, or do we have any students? I know we are capable of doing it, but do we have any students that have utilized the Georgia Virtual Academy versus virtual, in our system?
Yes, sir. I don't have the answer to that question at the time. I can research and get back with you. I'm going to have to get with Josh Griffiths and take a look at Infinite Campus and our enrollment, see how many kids are enrolled in the Georgia Virtual Academy.
Okay.
So I'll make a note of that and get back to you,
Okay.
the board members regarding that.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions, board members? All right, thank you, Dr. Warren.
All right, thank you. Have a good evening.
Okay. Board members, I want to, before we go to the information item, I don't know if we're going to, in Mr. Jones' absence, but I wanted to just go back to the consent agenda. Just want to just add some personnel to the consent agenda, HR personnel actions that were left off. We want to make sure we get them included, but we have two. Unfortunately, we have Ms. Stephanie Dobbins, who is going to be retiring at the end of October. Yeah, see, go ahead. Hey, anybody that make it to retirement, man, they deserve more than a hand clap. We hate to see this, but I am so happy that she's able to do that. We also have an AP at Griffin High School who is going to be relocating out of the country. I don't know the name as of yet. Maybe Stephanie knows.
Yes, sir. Tyree Simmons is the one that is relocating out of the country, and the replacement is Travis Smith.
Okay. All right, thank you for that assistance, Ms. Dobbins. We want to amend the agenda to include those names, and we need to re-vote on the HR personnel actions. If I could get a motion to accept those additional names. Right, Mr. Brown, motion, get a second.
Second.
Mr. Doss, second. All in favor? All right, 4-0. Thank you all for that. We have some information items. The June 21, 2021 financial report. You can look at that at your leisure. We have one item for executive session to discuss school safety plans prepared pursuant to the OCGA regulation or personnel pursuant to policies related to weapons in school. We would like to have a motion to go into executive session. Excuse me.
Moved.
Got a motion by Mr. Doss. Can we get a second? All right, second by Ms. McDonald, all in favor? 4-0. Before we go into executive session, I want to thank everyone, and I give other board members an opportunity to make any comments before we disperse from this open session. But I know this has been a tiring first full week going into our school year. We can only pray and hope for the best, but always my word to anyone that I encounter is stay in the fight. You know, that's the best that we can do. Just hang in there, give our best. But I appreciate everything you all are doing. You know, the Marines have a term. You know, you must adapt and overcome. And I just think we're doing a wonderful job of adapting to what being thrown our way. And we have been, in my opinion, we've been overcoming those things that have been thrown our way. So I just want to let everybody know I really do appreciate you, and I thank you for it, because it's all for the kids, and that's our primary responsibility. Any other board members?
No comments at this time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all.
One, Mr. Holmes.
Yes.
I just wanted to give a shout out to Ms. Pruitt, because she also, I was contacted by one of her former parents, and she took the hammer and did the questions I couldn't answer. So, Lindy, I wanted to thank you for taking care of that last week for me. And also, Mr. Akins, I just had a text from a parent that I've been in contact with through the last several months, suggesting that perhaps with so much unemployment in our community, that perhaps we let our parents know that there are jobs available here, maybe by sending a flyer home. I don't know if that's possible, but as far as custodians or bus drivers, I'm sure we have plenty of people out there that probably need the work. So just trying to think outside the box a little bit. Just want to thank everyone in the room and those of you who are listening. And, you know, the work is hard, but, you know, it's like Mr. Holmes said, we got to stay in the fight. It's about our kids, it's not about us. And so I appreciate all of you in the room and all of you listening to make that happen every day. And what I've heard today here is pretty enlightening with regard to lots of different things, but we have a great spirit about us. And Miss Evans, nice to see you, and thank you for all your hard work too. Thank you.
One thing that I want to pass on either to Lonnie or whomever, but I was contacted by a couple of media specialists about how we do the Chromebook distribution, and they say they've seen in other systems. I think one of them had a child that attend one of the systems where they're issued the Chromebook, and they keep that Chromebook instead of them having to take them up. They say it is so much better for the media specialists if we looked at and explored, you know, that methodology. So I don't know who needs to handle that. Who needs to run that ball across the goal line, but I'm just passing on. I assured them that I would share it with the leadership, but they said it would really help them out tremendously if we didn't take up the Chromebooks, you know, for the summer, whenever we take them up. They said, you know, if someone could just look into that, it would really help improve that process. So I've done my due diligence, so I just leave the rest up to you and the superintendent on that. If there's nothing else, we're now going into executive session. Thank y'all. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Motion to go into executive session.
All in favor?
Second.
All right. That's what Tim get paid for.